Ian Bailey, the self-confessed chief suspect in the murder of Sophie Toscan Du Plantier, has collapsed and died in Bantry in West Cork.
In December 1996, Sophie Toscan Du Plantier, who was a French television producer, was brutally murdered outside her holiday home in West Cork, Ireland. The investigation began well, but false witness statements misled the police, and the case eventually went cold. Despite the passage of time, no one has been held accountable for her tragic death. So what went wrong in this high-profile investigation? And why does the murder of Sophie still haunt her family and the community? Let's explore the details behind this ongoing mystery. Sophie Toscan Du Plantier was born in Buñol on July 28, 1957. She grew up in the colorful city of Paris, where she came from a well-off French family that valued the arts. From a young age, she was drawn to the film industry, and eventually, as she grew, she became a television producer. In 1991, she married Daniel Toscan Du Plantier, who was also a prominent figure in French cinema. Together, they formed a lively couple and raised Sophie's teenage son from her first marriage, whose name was Pierre-Louise. As her only child, he held a special place in her heart. Their connection was strong and built on trust and support. From helping with school projects to cheering him on at events, Sophie made it a point to be actively involved in his life. Whether it was exploring Paris or just having cozy movie nights at home, they enjoyed spending quality time together. In the busy life of Paris, where both Sophie and her husband worked in the film industry, their lives were often in the public eye. Determination of Sophie was evident in everything she did because she knew what she wanted and worked hard to achieve it. Sophie was young and passionate. She never allowed anyone to undermine her goals or dreams. With a strong belief in justice, she stayed true to her values while pursuing her career. Those who met her admire her courage and strength, especially Pierre, who looked up to his mother as a role model. Her resilience and determination inspired him every day, and their bond was a source of strength for both of them as they faced the challenges of life in the spotlight. However, the hustle and bustle of city life could be overwhelming. To find peace, Sophie often escaped to Shule, which is a peaceful village on the west coast of Ireland. Yet, despite the peaceful environment, Sophie had no idea this trip would be her last. With just about 700 people, Shule is known for its incredible scenery and friendly community. Artists and writers gather here for inspiration and feel captivated by the dramatic cliffs and calm waters. Sophie had visited Ireland several times as a teenager and purchased a cottage at Toormore in 1993, which became her holiday retreat. Many locals knew her by her maiden name, Munoz. On December 20th, 1996, Sophie arrived alone in Ireland. She was excited to spend the Christmas holidays in her cozy cottage located in Dunmanus West, rural West Cork. This little haven was her escape from the hectic work life of Paris because she considered it a place where she could relax and recharge. When Sophie arrived, she quickly fell in love with the local charm. She chatted with friendly neighbors and ran towards the shops in the village. The locals welcomed her warmly as they had known her since she was a child. The crisp winter air and beautiful landscapes made her feel at home. But underneath the calm, something terrible was about to happen. The calm days were about to be shattered by a tragedy that would change the close-knit community forever. No one could have imagined what was coming for Sophie in this serene part of Ireland. On the morning of December 23rd, a neighbor named Shirley Foster called the police with a heavy heart. She saw something terrible, a body lying outside the home of her neighbor. It was a chilly morning and the scene was shocking. When the Irish police, also known as the Garda, arrived, they saw the victim, who was later recognized as Sophie. Her face was so severely damaged that it was hard to recognize her right away. She was dressed in a cozy dressing gown over her pajamas, but she still had on her boots, as if she had stepped outside for a moment, maybe to get some fresh air. Next to her was a concrete block stained with blood, and it became clear that this might be the weapon used against her. Blood was also found on the gate and along the path leading to the back door, where the keys were still stuck in the lock. Everything seemed so ordinary inside the house, and there were 2 wine glasses sitting untouched on the drying rack. It felt like whatever had happened took place outside, in the cold. Forensic experts later determined that she had been attacked shortly after leaving the pub, likely in the early hours of December 23rd. The violent nature of her death raised immediate questions about the motive behind the attack. The discovery of Sophie Toscan Du Plantier's body sent shockwaves through the small village of Choule and beyond. What was once a peaceful place quickly turned into a crime scene and drew intense media attention from both Ireland and France. Investigators faced a daunting challenge, and they had to piece together the circumstances of her death while under the watchful eyes of the public and the press. Local law enforcement came into action and worked alongside forensic teams. They accurately collected evidence from the scene and hoped to find any forensic material that might help identify the murderer of Sophie. Investigators spoke with locals and patrons at the nearby pub and tried to build a timeline for the last hours of Sophie. However, the absence of immediate suspects made their task even more complicated. One of the significant issues arose early in the investigation. The state pathologist, Dr. John Harbison, did not arrive at the scene until 28 hours after the body was discovered. This significant delay meant that the damp weather could have washed away or contaminated crucial evidence. This raised concerns about the police investigation and made people wonder if it would lead to answers or end up being unsolved. During this time, the Gardaí faced criticism for mishandling evidence. Several items went missing while in their custody, which included a blood-stained gate. Although they later claimed the gate was disposed of because it wasn't helpful as evidence, this raised more questions. An investigative report noted that, while the police investigation lacked proper management, it found no evidence of high-level corruption. However, records of the investigation had been altered with some pages missing, which only added to public concerns. When the body of Sophie was finally examined, the findings were disturbing. She had several defense wounds and scratches on her hands, indicating she had fought back. Additionally, she had suffered serious blows to the back of her head and face, which made her barely recognizable. Unfortunately, because her body had been exposed to the cold for so long, it became impossible to determine an accurate time of death. The crime scene itself didn't provide much clarity. Besides some traces of blood found on the gate and back door, there were no indications of a struggle inside the cottage. Sophie was seen wearing her boots over her pajamas, which suggested she had gone outside for a specific reason. The keys left in the back door hinted that she might have stepped out briefly or could have been trapped outside by someone. In the kitchen, 2 wine glasses were found on the counter. Their presence didn't confirm that someone else had been in the cottage. They could have been used by Sophie the day before. Overall, the clues left at the scene were minimal, and among the blood samples collected, only one was identified as not belonging to Sophie. At the time, DNA testing was still in its early stages, but it became the only significant lead the investigators had. With such a weak trail of evidence, the police began tracing movements of Sophie since her arrival at the cottage. They sought to piece together her final days and spoke to anyone who might have seen her and checked in with local businesses. As the investigation extended, it became clear that the search for answers would be challenging. The murder of Sophie shook the small village of Choule. It was the first murder in nearly 100 years, and the fact that a married mother was killed right before Christmas made it even more shocking. Residents were in disbelief that such violence could happen in their quiet community. To honor Sophie, the villagers stayed awake to pray and came together to mourn and support each other. This tragic event led to meaningful discussions about safety, especially for women. and the importance of staying alert, even in silent rural areas. As the investigation continued, the media played a major role in shaping how people viewed the case. The coverage created a sense of moral panic. Many media outlets reported on Sophie's murder as a shift from a safe, multicultural village to one now filled with fear. The stories often included wild theories about what happened. Some speculated about French hitmen, while others suggested bizarre ideas, like the notion that a horse killed Sophie. Two crime podcasters from London decided to explore the case in detail and created a multi-episode series that caught the attention of major networks like Sky Atlantic and Netflix. While these documentaries often focused on sensational aspects and the question of who did it, this renewed attention led to important discussions about how crimes against women were portrayed in the media and the need for responsible reporting. These developments raised two key questions for researchers. Firstly, how similar was the recent media coverage of Sophie's case to the sensationalized stories often seen in cases of violence against women? Another question was whether podcasts and documentaries could provide a more thoughtful analysis of such crimes, which moved beyond sensationalism to offer a more serious examination. As the police looked into her final days, they found some key details that helped tell her story. The day after she arrived in Scholl, Sophie was spotted shopping in town. As she talked with friendly locals, one shop owner noticed something odd. A man in a black coat and hat was watching Sophie closely while she shopped, and after she left, he followed her. The evening before her body was discovered, Sophie decided to take a walk to Three Castle Head. This beautiful track offers stunning views and includes the ruins of Dunlow Castle. It is also known for a local legend about the White Lady, the spirit of a bride who had tragically thrown herself off a cliff. People believed that seeing her meant something terrible was about to happen. During her walk, Sophie claimed she saw the White Lady. She later shared this frightening experience with her friends and even said it scared her to think she had encountered a ghost. After visiting her friends, she went back to a local pub for tea where she chatted with neighbors. It felt like a normal evening, but little did anyone know how it would end. The last person to speak with Sophie was her husband, Daniel, who was in Paris. They had a phone call around midnight, which was likely filled with love and support. However, after that call, something terrible happened sometime between midnight and when her neighbor found her. It highlighted the urgency and complexity of understanding the circumstances surrounding her tragic fate. The first suspect of police in the murder of Sophie Toscan was her husband, Daniel Toscan. The couple decided to separate because Sophie discovered that Daniel was having an affair. Ironically, Sophie was also involved with another man, but had just decided to end that relationship before her trip. She chose to spend the holidays alone in Scholl to escape the stress of her separation. On the night of December 22nd, neither Daniel nor Sophie's lover were in Ireland, and they were both in France. As the police began their investigation, the small town of Scholl droned with gossip. Locals suspected that tourists might be involved in the murder of Sophie. However, the police believed the killer was likely someone familiar with the area and knew the roads to her remote cottage. As the investigation continued, the police focused on a man named Ian Bailey. Originally from Manchester, England, Ian was born on January 27, 1957, and moved to Ireland in the early 90s after a difficult divorce. He sought a quieter life and worked as a freelance journalist, sometimes publishing under the name Ian Bailey. He also had jobs as a fish farm worker and ran a market stall selling pizzas and poems. Ian lived with his partner, Catherine Jules Thomas, in Goleen from 1992 onward. Although he enjoyed his life in Scholl, many locals found him arrogant and overbearing. On December 23rd, the couple heard about Sophie's body being found and rushed to the crime scene to gather information for a story. Despite police telling them not to share details, Ian was determined to write about the murder, which was the first in Schul in a century. As Sophie was a public figure, her tragedy attracted international media attention. Ian began to write about the life of Sophie, including her relationships. An article titled "Sophie's Tangled Love Life" suggested she had been inviting various men to her cottage. The family of Sophie quickly clarified that she was only involved with one man and had ended that relationship before her trip. This clarification led to more gossip and grabbed the attention of investigators. While Ian claimed he didn't know Sophie well, some neighbors insisted they had met. He continued to speculate about Daniel being behind the murder and suggested that he wanted to avoid financial loss in their divorce. However, police felt this theory didn't match the violent nature of the crime. On January 11th, a key piece of information came to light. An anonymous caller reported seeing a man at a bridge near Sophie's house at 3 a.m. on December 23rd. He was wearing a black coat and hat, similar to a man that a shop owner had seen following Sophie on December 21st. It turned out that the tip came from Marie Farrell, the shop owner. She had reported it anonymously because she was at the bridge with another man and didn't want her husband to know. Based on her description and other witness accounts, police identified the man as Ian Bailey and made him the main suspect. A few days after the murder, Ian was interviewed and had scratches on his arms and face. He said these were from cutting down a Christmas tree.
Right, well, there wasn't any scratch on my forehead. I had a little nick on the top of my head, which was actually in my hair, so it wasn't visible, and that was from a turkey.
Since no pictures were taken of his injuries, they couldn't be examined later. After naming him a suspect, Ian suggested that a hitman hired by the ex-husband of Sophie was responsible, but police thought the crime was committed by someone local. They closely watched him, but couldn't build a strong case. On February 10, 1997, in order to build a strong case, the police arrested Ian Bailey. When police searched his home, they found evidence of a fire in his yard. A neighbor had seen smoke coming from his house a few days after the murder, but Ian claimed the fire had happened earlier in December. The police found no evidence at his home or studio that linked him to murder of Sophie. The partner of Ian, Jules, was also arrested and questioned. She said that on the night of the murder, she and Ian were at a local pub and then drove to a viewpoint where they saw the lights on in Sophie's and the neighbors' houses. However, while Ian claimed he was in bed all night, Jules said he woke up in the middle of the night due to work. When Ian was confronted about this, he changed his story and said he went to his studio. Jules didn't see him until 9 a.m. the next morning and noticed a wound on his face, which he thought could have been there before. However, the evidence against him was minimal. Traces of blood found at the scene did not match anyone and had been heavily contaminated. The cold weather complicated the timeline, and crucial evidence, such as the gate from Sophie's house that also had blood traces, had been lost. The Director of Public Prosecutions reviewed the case but could not formally charge Ian. Despite being held for 12 hours and maintaining his innocence, there was no strong evidence which connected him to the crime scene. As a result, he was released. The media began labeling him as the main suspect, which made Ian very angry because he felt he was losing control of the story. As the investigation continued, his mental health seemed to decline. Locals reported seeing him howling at the moon or carrying a stick he claimed had magical powers. Howling at the moon is a condition in which a person wastes his time and energy and tries to do something that is impossible or to get something that is unattainable. As more news came out, some neighbors even said Ian had confessed to killing Sophie, but later said it was just dark humor. On January 27, 1998, Ian was arrested again, with hopes that he would eventually confess, under the belief that the police had evidence against him. However, the situation remained unchanged, and there was hardly any evidence left. With no formal charges, Ian was once again released. The police again faced heavy criticism for their handling of the investigation. Although many believed he was guilty, he invited the press to his home after his second arrest to declare his innocence and criticize the media frenzy surrounding him. He provided hair samples from himself and his partner to the police. After 2 failed attempts to extract a confession, the case grew cold, with no new evidence surfacing. In 2003, Ian sued several media outlets for defamation, but lost the trial. This loss led to police files becoming public, which only heightened public suspicion regarding his involvement in the murder of Sophie. During the trial, Marie Farrell, who was the key witness, testified about seeing Ian near the crime scene. She claimed he had threatened her to change her statement. The troubled relationship of Ian with his partner also came to light, which included previous incidents of domestic violence. Although Jules defended him, the public perceived Ian as a violent man. After losing the defamation trial, it seemed inevitable that Ian would be charged. However, the Director of Public Prosecutions concluded there was insufficient evidence to link him to the crime scene, and he would not face charges. The family of Sophie was dissatisfied with this outcome and sought to have Ian prosecuted in France, where laws allowed for charges based on circumstantial evidence. In 2008, they requested that all files be transferred to the French justice system for a trial against Ian, who could not be deported from Ireland due to insufficient evidence. In a surprising turn and twist, 10 years after Marie Farrell first made her statement, she withdrew it during the trial. Marie said that while she had seen a man on the night of the murder, she had lied about his identity due to pressure from the police. She clarified that Ian Bailey had never threatened her, and she stressed that her original testimony was not true. This retraction brought to light several problems with the investigation. It revealed how the case had been affected by police mishandling, the loss of important evidence, and biases in the approach taken by law enforcement. These issues raised serious questions about the integrity of the investigation and the reliability of the testimonies that had been used against Ian. In 2007, the family of Sophie founded the Association for the Truth to push for progress in the investigation. In February 2010, a French magistrate issued a European arrest warrant for Ian Bailey, which led the High Court in Ireland to approve his deportation. Bailey appealed this decision to the Supreme Court. In March 2012, the Supreme Court ruled in his favor and stated that the French authorities did not intend to try him at that time. Additionally, 4 of the 5 judges agreed that the European arrest warrant prevented his deportation because the stated crime occurred outside French territory and there was insufficient cooperation. In November 2014, Ian sued the Irish state for being wrongfully targeted in the murder of Sophie. His legal team intended to use withdrawn statements of Marie to demonstrate that the police had exerted influence. However, when called to testify, she refused to disclose the name of the man she had been with that night. This lack of credibility severely damaged Ian's case and led him to lose the suit. Moreover, in the same year, it was revealed that phone calls at Garda stations had been secretly recorded. This raised concerns that some recordings from Bandon Garda station contained evidence of irregularities in the investigation into the murder of Sophie. The Fennelly Commission examined 297 recorded calls related to the case. The Commission found that there was evidence suggesting Garda E had considered altering or suppressing evidence that might pardon Ian Bailey. However, it concluded there was no proof that they actually did this. The Commission also noted that Garda E had improperly shared confidential information about the investigation with journalists and other civilians. In 2016, Ian Bailey wrote to the Director of Public Prosecutions and requested a trial in Ireland to clear his name, but this did not happen. In March 2017, he was arrested in Ireland based on a European arrest warrant issued by French authorities, who were seeking his deportation to stand trial for the homicide of Sophie Toscan. The High Court in Ireland approved the warrant. However, Bailey successfully avoided extradition. In 2018, a French court decided that there was enough evidence to hold a trial, even though Ian was not present. So in 2019, a trial began in France in the absence of Ian. The trial was unique because it involved no jury, only 3 judges, and over 30 witnesses. On May 31, 2019, Bailey was convicted of murder charge in Paris court and sentenced to 25 years in prison. A European arrest warrant was issued. The High Court of Ireland ruled there was insufficient evidence to deport him and allowed him to remain in Ireland. After that, Ian Bailey could not leave Ireland. If he visited another European country, he had a risk of arrest and deportation to France. In the summer of 2022, a dedicated unit in the Irish police announced a full review of the case of Sophie. Ian Bailey died on January 21, 2024, at the age of 66, from a suspected cardiac arrest outside his home in Bantry. His life was filled with controversy, as he had a history of domestic violence toward his partner, which had led to her hospitalization. In 2001, he was convicted of assault in Shule District Court. A report from a psychiatrist noted that he displayed violent and narcissistic behavior, especially when drinking alcohol. The son of Sophie still visits, feeling the deep void left by the absence of his mother. 25 years later, the pain of her loss stays, and without a resolution to the case, it remains difficult for him to find closure and move on from this heartbreaking chapter of his life.
Well, it's been now more than 27 years since my mother was murdered in Ireland. So, few days more, few days it's okay. But of course, I've been, it was like a shower in my head. But now I feel okay, back again.
The murder of Sophie Toscan Du Plantier is one of the most notorious unsolved cases in Irish history. The investigation has been complicated by conflicting witness testimonies and the profound grief of her family. Despite new leads surfacing, the quest for justice feels far from complete.